Hello, Drukhari fans, and welcome back to the Index in-depth for the Dark Kin. This is Drukhari Part 2, and in this episode, I'm going to be taking you through some of the immediate stand-up units in the book that I think you're going to want to use as you start building Drukhari lists and getting stuck into 10th edition. So we're going to cover quite a lot of ground, going to unpack what I think is good, why I think it's good, why you might want to start there. Obviously, I might not get everything. There's certainly going to be other things in here you want to try, but I'm trying to think with the overall meta in mind, other things you might face, and how I think Drukhari might want to build in order to function in that environment. So what we're going to do is break this up. We're going to think about some of the key leaders you can select to build your Drukhari army around. Think about some of the most important units. Then think about a few of the key vehicles and a couple of the key monsters, and I'm sure you can guess which ones. I'm not going to tell you every single thing about every unit, but I'm going to explain what their role is, what their use is, why I think you might want them. And obviously, you can feel free to let me know if there's other things you've seen in there that you really like the look of. Do let me know in the comments. We'd really love to hear from you. So first up, key leaders. I think the good news with Drukhari is that actually all of the leaders displayed have a role. You can use any of them. They're all going to help a unit function. They're all quite cheap, and they all bring something. And especially because Lilith and Urian get the Circulus and Homunculus keywords, they help you to get your pain tokens via the Real Space Raid detachment as well. But the three standouts for me going into 10th edition are Lilith, Drazar, and the Archon. Now, Lilith is fantastic. She's a melee blender. She chucks out huge numbers of hits. She can go up to 12 attacks with double exploding sixes and rerolls for a turn. She's anti-infantry too. And she buffs up a witch cult unit to be +1 strength and +1 AP, which actually I think is the only way to make a convincing hammer witch unit that's actually going to hurt things and threaten things beyond just chaff and bullying weaker units. So Lilith is excellent. She's also got fight first. When she uses her buff to go up to 12 attacks, she also gets a 3-up invuln, so she can tank some enemy attacks during a crucial fighting turn and then help you to trap and lock up the enemy in combat with your witches and cause them damage if they fall back. So I really like Lilith. I think the fact that witch cults can still access advance and charge via acrobatic display means that at least one witch unit with Lilith is going to continue to play a really important role as a unit that can run out, grab objectives, tie up the enemy, and make trouble. So yeah, absolutely big fan of Lilith, and I think 105 points, very reasonable for what she offers to you. Drazar is an interesting one because obviously, as we know, Drazar has got a little bit weaker. Generally speaking, he's not quite the devastating force he used to be, but he's still very powerful, and he is a little cheaper now at 105 points. So I think if you're going to run Incubi, you really want Draz. Either a 5 with Draz or perhaps even a 10 as a hammer unit with Drazar in a Raider, I think very effective, because the +1 to wound from Drazar means that Incubi is still going to threaten a very wide range of targets, and the fact that Draz can target enemy leaders with precision and get you more pain tokens for doing so, but also has that nice devastating wounds 3 on his big combat weapons to just spike a little bit more damage through, makes them extremely strong. And again, with an invuln, with a decent armor save, Draz is better positioned to tank any damage that Incubi unit is taking on the way in or during the combat, and keep your actual fragile Incubi alive. So big fan of Drazar, still think he's useful, still think you're going to want 1 or 2 of those push combat units in your list to clean up when you've weakened the enemy up with your shooting and to take key points at key moments. Finally, I think perhaps the greatest sort of utility piece in the army at the moment is the Archon. Now, the Archon now has the sort of Agents of Vex style rule built in. So if he's on the board, you can at some point add 1 CP to the cost of an opponent's important stratagem. Massively, massively useful. And there's so many things that people are going to be wanting to do, whether it's Phantasm, Overwatch, Armor of Contempt, a whole range of 1 CP strats that really hurt us that you're now going to be able to make expensive and force the enemy to make difficult choices during the game. So the Archon's Vect is massive for that. He can go with the Court of the Archon and a Cabalite unit, and he gives those units full rerolls to wound, which is also absolutely massive for your shooting, for your fighting. So the Court of the Archon bodyguard is actually deceptively dangerous once you factor in all of the things that the Court gives you as well. And I think an Archon with his 2-up invuln, playing the pesky Shadowfield game from hidden inside a unit, is still an invaluable option to have. Those 3 would be my standouts going into list design at this stage. Key units. I think the biggest glow up amongst our troops was definitely Cabalites. Cabalites now sticky objectives when they're on them at the start of your command phase, including in transports. So that's very nice, very flexible, help you to tag and lock down parts of the board and then move on. They have a good range of shooting guns. They have all of those built in. Now, 120 points for 10 is not cheap, but you're getting Dark Lance, Blaster, Splinter Cannon, Shredder. And what you can do with these is split them up using Venoms, put 5 of them into a Venom and then take the other 5, put them in a Raider. So it's very possible to have a Raider that's got 2 stacked Cabalite 5-mans with all the special guns in there. And then you drop a pain token on that Raider. And thanks to Firing Deck, it's going to be re-rolling its Dark Lance. It's going to be re-rolling the Dark Lances for the Cabalites inside. It's going to be re-rolling all of those useful guns. The Poison 3-up now gets wounds through a lot more reliably as well. So I think Cabalite shooting has gone up a level. And their mission play via the sticky objectives is also really, really nice. So I definitely think a good list is going to start with a few units of Cabalites to give you some anchor and mission play on the board and a bunch of extra Dark Lances to add to the party. The Court of the Archon's a funny unit now. You only get 1 of each of the special characters. And they've got a sort of whole mess of attacks in there. But when they're led by an Archon, the re-rolling wounds and the fact that one of them gives you lethal hits, the other one gives you -1 to wound, another one gives you fight first, makes that unit deceptively dangerous. The Archon himself is a bunch of strength 5, AP2 damage 2, I think it is. But again, he's anti-infantry 3-up, but with rerolls to wound and lethal hits, he's going to put that through quite consistently onto enemy targets. So I really like the Court of the Archon. With the Archon as a sort of bodyguard unit and an anchor, might mean that the Archon himself can actually be on the board in order to use his Vect ability, although indirect does make that a very real problem for us. And I think they're a really punchy, nice little unit, especially mixed with Cabalites, so you've got some ablative wounds on the edge of the squad just to take any of the early shots that someone decides to throw at you. I've put Witches in here. Now, I think Witches are probably one of the big losers in this index, but I still think 10 with Lilith, and in the right meta, 10 with the Succubus, is really useful. They've still got a lot of attacks. Accessing fight first and things like additional strength and AP off of Lilith or sustained hits off of the Succubus into the right targets is still really valuable. And being able to move speedily and get out and reach places other things might not be able to is massive. So yeah, still got a place for Witches. I don't think you're going to want more than 10 necessarily as you start building, but you might be able to find a place for another squad as well. The fact they're locked into being taken in 10s now definitely does hurt them a little bit less flexible. But again, you can break them up across Venoms if you so wish. Incubi are in quite a similar boat, I would say. I don't think these function in the way they used to. You can't just send off little 5s like missiles and get the job done on their own. But I definitely think that Incubi with Drazar are one of our best melee punches available. They're not expensive. 85 points for 5 is not expensive at all. And again, you're going to need that hammer, that blow for later in the game, especially as you start to whittle the enemy down and you need to clear them off of objectives. And I think Incubi, with their battle shock test that they force on impact as well, are still very well placed to do that. One mystery one, a Scourge, right? Scourge are in a funny spot. They can take all of these wonderful special weapons. So you've got the Dark Lance, strength 12, AP3, damage D6 plus 2. Got the Heat Lance, strength 14, AP4, damage D6 plus 3 when you're in melter range. Haywire for rerolling wounds and doing mortals against vehicles, or Shredders for overwatching with 18-inch flamers. These are all wonderful tools. Scourge are expensive. They're 120 wounds for 5. I think that's very pricey when you consider how fragile they are. And when we're living in a world of artillery and Overwatch, I don't think these are going to be easy to use. However, if you can pack 1 or 2 squads in and find a way to make them function without losing them to enemy shooting and use that innate built-in 6-inch fire and fade to pop out fire lances, pop down again, or dropping out of deep strike with a bunch of other stuff to deliver a hammer blow, they may well help you hit that critical mass of high strength, high AP, high damage shots that I think we're going to need to push through damage into particularly vehicle heavy armies, which I think we are going to see more of in the current game. So yeah, Scourge, an interesting one. The potential is definitely there. I think a lot of people are going to try them, and I'm very interested to see what the sweet spot ends up being. The key vehicles, I mean, we only have so many vehicles, but all of the basics are in a really nice spot. I really like the Ravager. At 95 points, the Ravager is extremely good value. You get 3 brilliant Dark Lance shots, strength 12, AP3, damage D6 plus 2. Strength 12 is massively important in the current game. It's got the Cabal keyword, so you can have it re-rolling its hits with pain tokens. You can have it re-rolling wounds against targets that are below half strength. So a bunch of Ravagers dropping in from deep strike and picking off targets, I think, is a really powerful option to have. And I think at the points cost they're currently at are very well placed to threaten to outtrade enemy armored just by getting the jump on them and getting their damage through at the right times before the enemy can reply. Not necessarily easy to use. You're going to have to pick your moments with Ravagers, but I think still very effective gun tank. In a similar vein, the Raider is fantastic. The fact that you can load it up with Cabalites, have all of the rerolls going off thanks to Firing Deck, the fact it can auto advance 6 when you need it to for that 20-inch move at key moments, the fact that you can have this in the sky with troops, then rapid ingress it in, stick in objective and move on. There's a bunch of uses for this, and I think the fact that it's toughness 8 will help it to keep it alive in the face of incidental artillery and other small shooting, which is going to be a real pest for anything we have that's just walking around on the board. So I really like where the Raider's positioned in the army at the moment. You definitely want a couple to get your melee units where they want to go, maybe another one to get your shooting where it wants to go. Finally, the Venom. Now, the Venom sort of makes all of this work because the only way to split Cabalite squads up and get the good guns into 5s is to put something in the Venom, right? So you need a couple of Venoms to break these squads up. And Venoms themselves are very speedy. Stuff can get out, shoot and fight, jump back in the end of the fight phase. So that's very useful if you hide Venoms behind walls and jump in. You can let your melee units avoid giving themselves up to clear chaff. You can go out, fight, kill the chaff, jump behind a wall, hide in the Venom again. And the splinter cannons, double splinter cannons, are actually for 80 points solid now. AP1 damage 2, poison 3 up with exploding 6s is very nice. Definitely not to be sniffed at, and will pick off Marines and equivalent in the open very happily. So I think all of these are great. I think a flotilla, a genuine real space raid with all of the vehicles leading the way and getting everything where it wants to be is going to be the way to play this army. The fact they can all deep strike gives you a massive amount of tactical flexibility, being able to decide when you drop in. As I say, it really does feel like a beta strike army to me at the moment. It feels like there's going to be a turn 2 where a bunch of boats drop down, chuck sort of pain token empowered shooting into the enemy, make a huge dent, and then send in the combat to clean up later in the game once you've dealt the killer blow. Definitely feels strong, definitely feels capable. All of these things are fragile. They're not going to take much shooting if they get exposed, so you have to make sure you hit on your terms. If you do that, I think we've got some very powerful vehicles. In the key monsters, I think there are probably 2. Well, there are only 2. We have 2 monsters, but I like both of them. They both offer something. The Talos come in pairs now. 90 points each is a bit cheaper. I think their combat is still very solid, but what's nice about Talos is that they're now very flexible. Their shooting is also very good. The Twin Haywire Blaster is fantastic for vehicles. The Heat Lancers are just very good at punching a bit of damage through armor. Anything without an invuln is going to really hurt if you hit it with the twin-linked Heat Lancers with pain tokens involved. The fact that they can get empowered as soon as they've killed something means that after that, they're much more independent and can go off and do whatever, and you don't need to invest too much in them. And with Insensible to Pain, you can pop the -1 to wound and make these just that bit more annoying for the enemy to remove. Now, I think Talos are quite slow, and the only thing to keep an eye on is whether you really need that kind of center brawling potential that they bring, or whether you're better placed leaning fully into speed, maneuverability, and longer range guns. But I'm hopeful that Talos will have a role, whether in a pair or maybe a 4, as something that can float up and get stuck into the enemy, safe in the knowledge that it can actually take a punch and requires a bit of enemy commitment to remove. Next up, the Kronos. Now, the Kronos is just funny. At 50 points, just very funny. Very cheap. Gives that pain token regen on 4s when you use it, so helps the army to pay for itself. Still has quite reasonable little guns for dealing with enemy chaff, so you don't want to walk into range of it with fragile units like other elves. The Flamer will just cause harm to it in Overwatch, for example. And I think these help the rest of the guns in other places to sing. Feels like a list where you're going to want lots of lances of varying descriptions, Heat Lances, Dark Lances, maybe some Haywire, and the Kronos is just going to be hiding around somewhere, helping it all get its pain tokens back as it shoots to make sure you shoot at full efficiency for as much of the game as you possibly can. That's where I'd start. I think those are all the key things. Thank you very much for watching, and do let me know what else you like the look of in the index. Have you seen anything else that you might get to use? Why might you use it? What do you think the sort of value of some of the other units I haven't talked about here are? Thank you very much for watching 6++ as well. We are continuing to put out a regular flow of content at the moment. We're doing index in-depths for literally every army. By the time we're done, we're going to keep those coming out to you over the next few weeks. And we also have regularly scheduled shows. So we've got the podcast show, that 6++ show, goes live in the UK at 8:30 on a Tuesday. You can catch me and the boys there every week. And we have other regularly scheduled content in the pipeline as well. Very excited to get some bat reps and some league games going for this. So I'll be running the Drukhari throughout that, and I'll be sure to let you know how I'm getting on with the Dark Kin in 10th edition. Have fun out there and go and take some names with your Dark Lances.